All right, we're back and very excited to welcome in to the Big Three IDP podcast. We've had some guests on before, but this guy, if you're a fan of the Fantasy Footballers podcast, you know the name. He's known as the Borgognoni, as Kyle the editor. It's Kyle Borgognoni. Kyle, thanks for coming on the show, man. We're so glad to have you.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. And yeah, Borgognoni is as a name I'm still struggling with some days. First time they referenced it, I didn't know what they were talking about, but you pronounce Borgognoni perfectly, so I already like you guys.
Beautiful. I have to talk to a lot of people for my job, and the most stressful thing is like, am I going to pronounce this person's name correctly? So
yeah, I'm going to call you Kyle B.
Kyle B. That's the Borgognoni from now on. So that which makes me think of like a mythical sea creature or something. So you've got quite a reputation on the show already.
Hey, if I'm a mythical person to you guys, that's I'm winning some cool points already.
Mm-hmm. And what's cool, Kyle, about you is that you are on the show tonight. As listeners will know from listening to the beginning of the show, we are making the case for IDP tonight. You are not currently playing any kind of IDP fantasy, but you were nice enough to come on the show with us maniacs and let us bend your ear for about 30, 45 minutes here and try to convince you to play in an IDP league. So we're up for the challenge, and it sounds like you're coming in with an open mind as well.
For sure. I've had a couple of league mates that have brought up IDP for years, and it's gotten trashed. Like no one's talked about. Like I'd rather talk about kickers in our league. I'm a pro kicker person. And so, he's brought up IDP for years. So I'd like to hear rational, because my friend's super emotional. He's like, so I want to hear good, rational arguments, and I'm open to hearing it.
Well, you will get none of that. You will get all emotional, fiery takes, probably lots of references to fast food. But that's what we love about the Big Three IDP podcast, that we can get on here and have some fun. And we do. We have some arguments written down. We're gonna give you 4 different points as to why we think you should give IDP a shot. But before we get into that, let's do a little bit of background on who is the man behind the moniker of the Borgognoni. So tell us a little bit about how long you've been playing fantasy. How'd you get into it? How did that all start for you?
Yeah, so for me, baseball statistics was my first love. Like in life, my dad gave me the box scores of the paper, and that was like my section. I remember at age 4, that was like my section that my dad would just give to me. And so I just always loved statistics, but baseball really was how I got into the fantasy world. And so I had baseball leagues that I was in from, 5th, 6th grade all the way through. And I just got addicted to being able to manage my own team. It's probably a control issue. It's probably all of us.
That's fantasy. Right.
We want
absolutely.
A little bit more control, but just that intersection of statistics and whatnot. And so I played football, basketball, and baseball, fantasy sports all the way through high school. And the crazy part is I actually took a break when I got to college, which is usually when people kind of ramps up. But I took a break for a couple of years, and some of my college friends started a league. I got in that league, and then I just happened the very first week that I got back in, I started listening to Fantasy Footballers and got addicted to the show. And with my friends, it was kind of just I wanted to keep up the conversation. I wanted to keep up the funny banter. And so I started our own league podcast with a couple of friends. And so that just got me energized, where I kind of got addicted.
Now, I'll ask you, because I can remember mine, and boys, let me know if you remember yours as well. Do you remember your first fantasy football draft, who you took as your number 1 overall pick?
I have a very distinct memory in high school of taking Charlie Garner on one of my teams. The running back, he was a Raider, he's a 49er.
Wow.
And I remember being very disappointed.
I was going to say, I've never heard of this guy. So, mine was, I'm a Colts fan. So mine was my first draft. I mean, looking back, I guess it wasn't as bad of a pick, but I took Marvin Harrison in the first round of my first ever fantasy draft. So that was all right. I think I was like a freshman in high school, maybe, for my first draft. Do you remember yours?
It definitely would have been like no PPR though, too, right?
No.
This is standard.
This was in the dark ages of fantasy for sure.
Yeah, my first pick was Mike Vick.
Hey, wow. Very nice. Falcons days?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
It's kind of a cheat code for a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kyle, you're a Falcons fan. You told us, so I'm sure you have some fond memories of the early Vic days.
Yeah, I mean, just for us, feeling like you're playing video games when you're watching watching your team play was awesome. But those teams underachieved a ton. We did beat the Vikings in the playoffs and the Packers on the road one time. That was basically it. But those teams were super fun to watch.
Oh yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt. Bobo, do you remember your first pick?
I don't know. I was always a Wes Welker dude, probably.
So you probably
It's
took
about as
Welker.
far back as I
You
can
probably
remember.
took Welker maybe a couple rounds too early.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned Kyle, getting hooked on the Fantasy Footballers podcast. Like once you got back into it, starting the podcast for your league. So, and it sounds like did you take a break on the league podcast for a while?
Yeah, we just when we had our second child, I couldn't keep it up because I was putting in 10, 15 hours for our own league podcast with about 12 people listening.
Mm-hmm.
We'd share with some friends and family that thought it was hilarious, but I just couldn't keep it up. And so also with just my increased role with the footballers, I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, but it sounds like that you may be back in. You may be back on that train.
It's a hard thing to quit, and maybe it's just my personality, but I love my friends. We've been friends for, some 10, 15 years, and we're all over the place. Somebody, lives in California, someone's in New York and whatnot. And so it's like my gift to my friends to be like, hey, let's keep this friendship going, is this podcast. And so there's a couple of them that if it is not, in their inbox on Friday morning when they have their cup of coffee, they're pissed at me.
They're like, Kyle, we're paying you good money to get this podcast out on Friday morning. What is happening?
Yeah, I do feel a little guilty though for the art because ours has kind of gone,
Yeah.
by the wayside as well. So I do feel guilty that we can't do it anymore.
The guys keep asking for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a couple guys try to pick up the torch and carry it for a couple episodes, but as they quickly found out, it's just hard to set aside time when you've got other stuff going on to do the show. Thankfully for us, as you can see, we're all in the same room. We all live in the same town. So in a way that almost makes it easier because it is it's nice just to get together every week with these two knuckleheads. And, we record about an hour and a half podcast and we're out in the shed, the Sode Shack, for 4 hours because we just sit there and talk football for, 2 or 3 hours before and after. So it is, we do miss the league podcast that we had. What was weird though, and I don't know if you noticed this with yours, we have 12 guys in our league, 3 of them in this room. So, there should have been maybe 12 listens per episode. And we were averaging 40 listens. I'm like, who are these 30 weirdos listening to a league that they have no connection to?
Yeah.
We shared ours on iTunes for a while, which, we weren't trying to make it big, but that's just the easiest channel we were using. And yeah, we were finding we were getting random listens from Germany and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's oh, cool. If you want to listen to our random league and our random inside jokes.
Yeah.
But I think for me too, I set the bar a little too high for myself. And I think the rest of the league where every single week we had it. I interviewed a couple people each week. I had a different intro music compilation every single week.
Wow. There's your 10 hours right there.
And everyone would have to send a voice memo. So if they're in the car, everybody in the league had to send a voice memo in of just a rant. And so it got to the point where it was man, I am coordinating 12 people's schedules each week just so I can put this out.
It is symptomatic of the sickness that is fantasy football. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned that things slowed down for the league podcast once you actually started working with the fantasy footballers. So for those who don't know the story, take us behind the scenes. You were obviously a listener of the podcast. How did you get hooked up with those guys and start working with them? Yeah,
so there was a point when the footballers first started out where there wasn't much content in terms of writing on the website. It was Jason and Andy, and they just a couple of people they commissioned. And so the first time they put out the call to get a writing staff, I just happened to see Jason tweet about it. And I just happened to, put myself out there. I had been writing for Fantasy Pros. I've been a news correspondent, so I basically just got to follow the Braves, follow the Falcons, and basically write every single news blurb possible. And I did that for a while. I started writing a quarterback article if they'd let me, but I was just kind of doing it on the side for fun. And so when I saw the footballers put out the call for writers, I was like, this is the best group. This is the most fun, at least in terms of that. And so I joined in my application, and Jason told me later, he said, Kyle, when I saw your name and I saw your application, he's like, I wanted you. And that meant a lot to me because there's thousands of people that apply.
Yeah, that's
And
cool.
I
Yeah,
do.
we all applied, man.
Don't listen. Don't listen.
I do have a writing background. I used to be an English teacher. And so there's a lot of editing stuff that I've just done over the years that I think helped part of that resume. And then with Fantasy Pros, I had gotten to the point where I had done a couple of podcasts with Bobby Sylvester, some baseball ones, some baseball previews, some draft kits. So I'd kind of gotten in a little bit, but for me, it was just once I got in the door of being on that writing team, you know, with fantasy football, it's just like once that door is open, you just want to keep it as wide open as possible. And so I didn't just write. I mean, I wrote good content. I wrote a lot, but I was, you know, involved in the process and involved with Brooks early on, where Brooks wanted to offload a lot of responsibilities. And so they just trusted me.
Nice. So your actual title, I believe, with the Fantasy Footballers is the editor-in-chief. Is that right?
Correct.
So in your kind of day-to-day response, is this your full-time job, what you do with them?
It is not. It is not.
Oh, okay.
It's basically I put in, depending on the week, the in season, it's, you know, basically 25, 30 hours in terms of I look over every single show before they look at it. So before they've ever looked at it, Brooks and I compile the document, all the stats, a lot of the talking points, and the goal is just to set them up to just do what they're really good at doing. It's just the banter. And so I love that part of the job because I have to like think what would be really good to throw out there. And then just to put stupid stuff in the document, stupid statistics or whatever. So no, I've been a teacher and I'm currently a high school pastor.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you actually, along with Brooks, it sounds like put the show doc together for each of the Fantasy Footballers episodes.
Yeah. So, you know, we're going through this week the QB Truth episodes. And so, you know, Brooks will compile from their consistency charts and I'll put in all the statistics, all the questions, and we'll put it in order. We'll put in, you know, when we do buy sell or any of our other segments, we're putting in those points. And then, you know, they'll add in stuff too, but it's basically before, you know, they record, the document's completely done and they get to show up, look through it, add stuff, put in the ads and whatnot. But yeah, we're just trying to set them up for success.
Yeah, we do a little prep on the doc. And it's funny, do you all use separate docs for each of your shows or do you just have one? Okay. See, we have just one podcast planning doc, and I looked the other day, and it is legitimately probably like 40,000 words at this point. Like, I work for a publishing company. Like, that's the length of most of the books that we put out is about 40,000 words.
Yeah,
so
it takes about a minute to load up.
Yeah, it does. It's like you're back on dial-up when that thing has to load. So and what's great about that, Kyle, is that you obviously help. You put in a lot of work getting the doc ready. But then if something's ever wrong, Brooks is the only one who gets blamed for it.
Oh, no, it's great. I don't put my name. I mean, I put comments on the side and whatnot, you know, where it's me. And when the jokes hit, you feel great. You're like, okay, this is slaying right now. I went on a rant for a while where I basically trashed Jimmy Graham as much as I could every single episode, any chance I could. Because he just looks like a corpse out there. But
yeah, I think we made that joke last week that he actually died 3 years ago, and it's just been his ghost running around the field.
We were mentioning it's kind of like Weekend at Bernie's, where he's just this corpse that you're just kind of
propping up. Yeah.
But yeah, Brooks usually gets the brunt of if something goes wrong, it's him.
There you go. That's right. So you are in Atlanta. The Vollers are they're in Phoenix, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you ever get down to the office there, the home base?
So I get to go at least once, maybe twice a year. So I went out and went to a Cardinals-Falcons game. I don't know if you remember, it was like week 6 or 7. We, of course, lost. I can't believe we lost the Cardinals. Anyway, so I went out there. I've been out for a couple games. I went out the beginning of, I think it was last season or the season before. But so I'll kind of get to go out there. But a lot of ours really is just video calls and just kind of checking in. And then, you know, the other part of my role is working with our team of writers. And it's not hard for me to say this, but like we have good people that write for us. It's not just like, hey, you're a good writer. You're in on this and you're in on like, hey, this is kind of your side gig, but you love being a part of this community. So that's pretty fun. And our Slack channel is pretty lit most of the time.
Lit. I bet it's like, hey man, you put that Oxford comma in there, like, bro, what are you doing? So yeah, I was gonna ask, like, in addition to helping with the show doc as the editor-in-chief, are you like looking over the articles as they go up on the site? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so I kind of organize all of our content to make sure what's coming out is actually relevant. You know, it's actually something that's going to show up on Google, like in terms of search engine. You know, we toy a lot with that of like, how do people get to our articles? Andy's a wizard when it comes to just people getting to the podcast. There's a reason why it's number one, is like they figured out on Google, when you search fantasy football podcasts, it jumps up to number one on Google. And I think we're at 2 right now, but for fantasy football articles, if you just write fantasy football articles, we're going to be 1 or 2 most of the time. And so we're trying to figure out not just what is relevant to people, what are people searching, but then with our team, when do we release stuff? Because it's January. If you're releasing an article about sleepers for 2020, the majority of our audience,
I don't really think about that right now.
Yeah, it's kind of people like us that are a little too hardcore.
The freaks.
Yeah, it's the freaks and geeks.
Yeah, and so I try to figure out what's best per month and how do we roll that out with the UDK when that comes out, or Ultimate Draft Kit. But so yeah, I'll look over every article and edit it and make sure it's not totally messed up and formatted right.
Yeah, I do a lot of the same stuff for my job. So sorry boys, I had to pick his brain here as a fellow editor. So I'm sure you got a good staff of writers, though, it sounds like. So it probably makes your job pretty easy.
Yeah, no, it really is not super hard where the process is great. And I think we put out fun stuff. Like the
articles are good, man. They're really good.
Yeah, our 25 statistics article, I started that like 4 or 5 years ago. And every year that's just like jam packed. We just did our quarterback one, our truth ones. We have one every year that it's called the Path to Wide Receiver one. And we just pick way far out there guys. So this past year we highlighted, Chris Godwin, which everyone was about, DJ Moore, people that you could get way late. And what if they just went bananas?
Yeah, nice.
Almost hit with Chris Godwin too.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for Michael Thomas going Super Saiyan, you might have actually had a Chris Godwin at number 1 finish.
Yeah, which is nuts.
So that's similar to what I think we did with the first episode, which was our first episode was Dark Horse Breakouts at linebacker, defensive end, and defensive back. So we picked like long shot guys that we thought could like break into the top 12 or top 24. And that's always fun. Like, who are guys that we could see like stepping into a bigger role? Because you always feel great like if you nail some of those. And we got a few right. We did all right.
Yeah, no Chris Godwins, no DJ Moores, but maybe 1 or 2 of the 9.
So it's like a baseball batting average. Maybe we're close to 300.
You guys could just tell me that for the defensive landscape, you guys knocked it out of the park, and I believe you.
Yeah,
we kind of did. It's very hard.
We went 9 for 9, Kyle.
Yeah.
Forget that we said anything previous to this. So yeah, that was one thing that was so appealing to us when you put out on Twitter that you were looking to do some more podcasts. We have always said, we're all fantasy footballers listeners, and I think I mentioned earlier, we followed a similar trajectory as those guys and similar to you, like doing a podcast for your league. And then, back in June of last year, Markham here was like, well, what if we just did a pod that was just IDP and it didn't have anything to do with our league? And so we started the podcast, and obviously this is a part of the fantasy football landscape that is still growing. It's still maturing. There's a lot of smart people coming into the space now, but it's still very much in its infancy as far as like podcasts and websites and stuff like that. So we very much want to be the fantasy footballers of the IDP world. And so one of the things that we loved that, the ballers do each week that I wanted to ask you about was, how did you all figure out what to do each day in season for each episode? Like, obviously you have a day of the week where you do waivers and then matchups and then, buy, sell? Like, how did you all decide what stuff would go on what days in season?
Yeah, I'd say, some of those are just due to the calendar where, on Mondays we're going to review and whatnot, but some of them are just strictly like ads based. So buy and sell is, locked in, like, hey, we committed with Pristine Auction. This is what we're going to do. When you just kind of look at listenership too, the day that matters the most, honestly, is Tuesdays, because waivers. Is a big deal. And so I even look at our articles, and the Tuesday waiver article could literally just be our show doc notes if we wanted it to be, and it would get like 10 times the amount of views as like, someone else that writes a snap counts article or whatever else, because that drives so much. And so we knew that Tuesdays was going to be waivers because that's what people want to listen to. The worst part, though, honestly, about in-season content is it's just out of date so fast. Nobody's going to go back and listen to week 5 waivers, and when you get to week 10, like, it's just irrelevant. And so you're just trying to say in the moment what is going to help someone stay in the course and get in the rhythm. And so, when we get to Thursday, Friday, it's hard to fit in that much. And even how we do matchups is really tough to, like, people complain all the time, like, you didn't mention every single player. And that's so hard. Like, how much can you talk about Christian McCaffrey? I don't know. Like,
start him. That's it. That's the Christian McCaffrey breakdown.
But
for sure. So that's the struggle.
I would argue too that helps your listens, because you get these people subscribing and you get them coming back every single day, wanting more. That just, kind of sets your, listener base, and they can kind of expand from there, because you got people who are playing fantasy football, competing throughout the year. And I think even a little bit this year, we started seeing the, downward trajectory of these teams that are weak, 10, 12, 14.
Yeah, around about October, November, it starts to kind of decline a little bit as more and more teams are out of the mix.
But y'all definitely have the setup to where it's something that you want to come back to every single day. Now, there's days that you want to hit more than others, like a Tuesday or even a recap. I like the Mondays.
I do like the recap as well, because I don't get to see every game. And so that's kind of my refresher of, like, okay, what guys did well that I might not have seen this weekend. And that was one question I was going to ask you is, one of the things that we want to do is, I don't know that we could ever do, unless we quit our jobs and say goodbye to our families. I don't know that we could ever do 5 days a week.
Is it on the table? It's on the table, though.
It's on the table. I mean, we've had that discussion.
The wives
know.
It's an option.
It's an option for sure. So we would like to start to emulate a lot of what the Ballers do and how they structure their podcasts on different days of the week to hit different points that listeners are most interested in. And so I was going to ask, it sounds like waivers is far and away the number one thing that we should add to our podcast in season, this upcoming season.
Yeah, and this is something that, I still want to integrate in ours, and we do it to a degree. It's just hard to fit in so much. But, like, I think why people like the Ballers so much is they feel like I know these guys, or I'm almost in their league with them. Most people on podcasts, you're like, I don't want to hear about your league. Just, but people really do want to hear about what's going on with their teams and with their people, because it's real to them. So I've always, talked about with us, and I encourage other people, if you can get your audience to feel like they're actually owning a part of the podcast, like it's actually their, thoughts, then they feel like they're bought into every episode, no matter what. Like, as a listener, I remember I got on a couple of mailbags where they mentioned my name. I remember thinking, I have to listen to every mailbag. They could say my name. And so what I would encourage you guys is, seeing your listeners and asking them, what part of the show can you guys give away to them? And, we've done in this past year, where little intros of our show, we usually have, like, this is Cortland Sutton, or this is, Melvin Gordon. We've had it where we've had, Patreon subscribers say, hey, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm from this league. And you get to tell your whole league about that. Hey, I did the intro for Fantasy Footballers. It's just, I've found with such a big base, the reason why I think we haven't lost a lot of people in this big mass is because we want them to continually feel like you are actually just as much a part of this podcast as us. And so you guys get to do that with IDP and say, you know what? You guys are a strange crew of people out there that love IDP. How can you guys feel like you own this podcast? And then they're going to be IDP evangelists for your podcast.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary though. These people are kind of dangerous at times.
We're gonna get tattoos of you guys.
Yeah, that would be great. One of many. So that was what I was going to ask you next, Kyle. Was what would you you've mentioned a few things already. What would you say has been across all the fantasy football podcasts out there? Heck, even the NFL podcast. There's so many to choose from, and obviously you guys have a very devoted fan base. We know the Foot Clan is strong with all the awards that these guys have taken home year after year. But what is it that you all would say has made you stand out in the minds of fantasy football fans? Like if you had to point to one thing and says, this is what the Ballers do better than anyone else that makes them stand out from the rest of the competition.
Yeah, I just think they don't have to force like having fun. It's just like you hear it and you naturally comes out. And so I think that forces you as a listener to go, I can make this fun for my league. And it kind of translates from I'm listening to some information each week to this is actually influencing me and influencing my league. And that's something I want to capitalize on more with just how we get to influence leagues. So yeah, I think they're really good at that. I mean, I will say we're really good at like I said, Google searches. People just, that's how I found us. I found us from, I want to get back into fantasy football. Let me go to fantasy. Oh, okay. This one, I'll try this one out. And I tried out a couple different ones, but I just remember thinking like, oh, I feel like I know these guys. And I think that's what you're saying. Like for y'all, having chemistry, being in the same hometown, that's a big deal.
It is. That's what we've always said. There are tons of really smart shows out there, but what we've always tried to hang our hat on was chemistry and humor, which makes for an entertaining show. An informative show is great, but you will come back repeatedly and listen to a show that entertains you, which is what I felt like the Ballers have done so well, is I will usually laugh at least a few times every episode, which you can't say for every fantasy football podcast.
For sure. Yeah, no, and it's fun. Like I listen to the episodes ahead of time. We'll record them and then they'll come out the next day, but I'll go back through the show doc and listen as I'm going through this, and I know actually what they're going to say, what stat or whatever. And that's actually not what makes it fun. Like for me, as someone who, I'm not just a listener, I'm part of the company, but I'm walking through the show and I'm going, this is hilarious. Like this is so fun. And we're talking about something we're talking about Derek Carr or whatever we're talking about at the moment. So
bring in the car.
Send him in.
So, well, this has been fun, Kyle. I could sit here and pick your brain all night about the Ballers, and we'll probably talk more off mic once we get done. But I want to give the listeners, the goods here in terms of if you're on the fence about IDP, maybe you've heard about it, somebody like yourself, they've got some league mates that maybe are petitioning them to, hey, let's think about this IDP thing. Let's give this a try. But you're still on the fence. We want to make the case. All right. So we've got 4 points that we're going to lay out here. And then at the end, we just want to hear your honest feedback of where do you stand now on IDP, having heard all this. All right.
Kyle, I do want to ask a question. Your league mates that were proposing y'all add IDP, how many were they wanting to add?
They hadn't gone to like the formal level of like actually like when we have our league votes, they never brought it up of, hey, we want X number of whatever. They haven't brought it that far.
It's very important.
That's one thing we'll talk about is how would you set that up? Like once we make the case, we'll actually lay out like, hey, this is how you should do it if you're going to think about doing it.
For sure. Because right now it's just this ambiguous world. Obviously, I watch football and I know defensive players, but it's the same thing, when I heard Superflex or just, 2 QB leagues, I had no exposure to that until I had it laid out and whatnot. So I'm open.
Yeah. All right. So that actually segues perfectly into my first point, which is that the learning curve for IDP, Kyle, is not as steep as you might think. It's sort of like one of those kind of ambiguous fantasy football terms that you've heard before, like tight end premium, like daily fantasy, like DFS or Superflex. And your guard is up at first because you just don't know what to expect. And IDP is very much the same way. We totally get it. But football fans, especially fantasy football fans who've been plugged into the game for any amount of time, already are further along that learning curve than what they might realize. So here, I want to do a test with you real quick. I want you to name 5 of who you would consider to be the best defensive players in the league.
Okay. Aaron Donald. I'm a little jaded thinking about Jalen Ramsey as a corner. I like Tyrann Mathieu a lot. I'm assuming Darius Leonard just kills it. And then let's go with Cam Jordan. He's good.
Great.
So
That's great.
if you had drafted those 5 guys at your IDP draft, you'd have one of the best defensive teams in the league. So of course, it's a lot like offense in that the big name guys, you have more exposure to those guys than what you realize. And just like offense, when you start to get into the depths of like who are the sleepers, who are the guys that are maybe getting some training camp buzz, that comes with experience. But honestly, as a fantasy football player and someone who watches football, you could show up to a draft and draft an IDP roster, and you would be in the mix from day one because you know football. And now you may not know the nuances of like, okay, is a linebacker 2 more valuable than a defensive end 3? Or how does that work? Or as I'm evaluating this trade, should I trade a safety 1 for an LB2? That sort of thing comes with experience. But as long as you have watched football and love football, like most fantasy football fans do, you're going to be further along that curve than what you think. So that's point number 1. Adam has point number 2.
Yeah, point 2, just it adds a exciting new challenge. We all love fantasy. We've been playing, fantasy for 15 years?
Yeah, I mean 10 or 15 years, right?
And we still love offensive only fantasy. That's still a big thing to us. We still have our leagues where it's just that, our home leagues and stuff. But, at a point that gets a little stale. And I think we hit that spot probably 10 years, 10 years in. So about 5 years ago. And there's been all these variations, of super flex, 2QB, tight end premium. We're just all grasping at straws here to try and figure out we want to be happy. Why are we not happy?
Why are we empty inside?
Yeah.
Why is my soul dark?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we're searching for this happiness, and the happiness we're looking for is IDP. It opens up this whole new world. It's just so much fun just discovering, just something so new. And there's not a lot of resources out there. But you're a quick learner. I know just because you work with such an awesome company and everything. So you would get it, and you would get it pretty quickly, I think. And so you have another advantage over your league mates.
Well, and the thing is too, Kyle, like the discovery phase, as you start to get past those tier 1 guys like a Cam Jordan or a JJ Watt, the discovery phase, I would compare it to like a new relationship. Like, do you remember what it felt like? You're married. When you first started dating your wife, you were like, okay, this is exciting. I'm a little terrified. I don't really know what's going on, but I want to learn more and keep going down this road, right?
Yeah, that's what I need to tell my wife is I'm looking to date someone else, and it's a lot of 300-pound men.
Yes, exactly. A lot of sweaty guys grunting and clapping in unison every Sunday. So that's exactly what starting that's the same feeling you had when you started an offensive only, started playing fantasy for the first time. Is I'm kind of stumbling through the dark here. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but it's exhilarating. It's fun. I want to learn more. And the longer you play fantasy, the further away you get from that spark, that thrill of the discovery. And to have that again, I mean, it opens up an entire new side of the ball. It's not just adding a super flex or making tight ends more valuable or taking away kickers or taking away defense or playing daily. It is opening up a whole nother side of the ball. And so that thrill of discovery is back in an exciting new way. So
It also makes you cooler too. You know, it's pretty cool being able to like point out a defensive player making a big play. You know, immediately on the screen, like, oh, that's Cam Jordan. And people are like, how do you know who?
and
that?
your wife's like,
Who is
Kyle,
that?
can you please stop giving me updates on the game? I'm trying to get dinner ready.
Yeah,
So Bobby has point number 3, Kyle.
Yeah. So we would also argue that it makes you a better fantasy football player. You know, all of our offensive leagues that we've played for years, we've always included that defense in. You know, last year you were probably grabbing trying to think of overall good defenses. You know, the Rams were kind of
Jaguars.
Jags,
Jaguars were fine.
49ers,
49ers.
Steelers.
Hopefully
yeah.
not Atlanta, basically,
No.
next year. But, you know, I think overall playing IDP makes you a better player. You know, when you're taking these defensive ends, when you're taking these, you know, the same guys you talked about, Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Honey Badger, when you start to play these IDP leagues, you're interacting, you know, with other owners. You know, we have people all the time. I was really trade heavy last year, and it is hard for the first couple of years to try to evaluate the difference between you know, an RB2 versus a defensive end. You know, somebody's sending you trade offers for, you know, an Aaron Donald. What does it actually take to buy an Aaron Donald? So that is the big learning curve. You know, plug into the big3idp.com, and me and Adam actually this year came up with basically a top 200 list of offensive and IDPs mixed.
Talk about making your brain melt.
Yeah.
Figuring out, okay, does this safety for the Oakland Raiders go above or below the wide receiver 2 for the Cardinals? Like,
it definitely makes you mad.
tough. Yeah, you could spend literally hours and hours and hours on it every night.
But you know, by going through and, you know, we're not going to act like the first year that we played like we knew everything.
No.
I'm a Rams fan. I paid way too much for Aaron Donald to begin with, and I'm completely fine with it. You know, I don't really care. I had Aaron Donald on my team, and I was okay with it. But
yeah, you'd probably overpay for Deion Jones, you know.
I love Deion Jones, by the way.
Yeah, Deion
He's my boy.
Jones. If you had gotten him, you'd been doing all right.
But it takes a while, you know. Same as offensive, you get a guy who, if he's just now getting into fantasy football, A, where have you been? And B, it's going to take you 3 years or so to actually understand value and what's going on and what makes a good trade. So, you know, I do argue that playing IDP probably makes you a better overall fantasy player, not just in IDP leagues, but also in your offensive-only leagues as well.
Yeah, like I joked before that doing an offense-only trade is like simple math, and doing IDP offense trades is like trigonometry. You know, it's just like, oh, if you can get the hang of, okay, throw in draft picks, throw in defensive players and offensive players, and you're trying to evaluate that, going to an offense for offense swap, it feels like, you know, a cinch.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does make you a smarter player. And here's the thing, too, that I think a lot of people are afraid of is if I start playing IDP, that means it's going to take away my focus on the offensive side, or I'm not going to pay as much attention, or I'm not going to care as much. That's actually not true at all. You actually enjoy offense more because it's not all there is now.
Right.
You have a whole other side of the ball that you get to pay attention to, and that means that now, you know, you have these two parts of fantasy that you love equally. And it just takes the pressure off. If you were feeling a little bit burned out with only offense, you know, it just, I don't know, it reinvigorates that love. And I think you end up enjoying the offensive side of the ball even more. You definitely have to be smarter about offensive too.
I argue maybe it almost makes you love your favorite team more. You
It
know,
does,
because you're getting
yeah.
on and checking the box score to see, and you might already do this now, but you're like, man, Deion Jones had 12 tackles and had a sack and a, you know, pass defense. And, you know, Keanu Neal got hurt again, and, you know, Grady Jarrett had a sack. So, you know, it does really, you know, I'm a Rams fan, so we've got a good defense. The Colts, you know, have Darius Leonard, and then
That's
the
it.
Vikings
That's all we
have
need.
Daniil Hunter. So,
Yeah.
man, definitely makes me, you know, be a more hardcore fan for sure.
Yeah, and that's actually the fourth point, Kyle, is that IDP, it makes you enjoy football more than you ever have. So I think, would you agree that in addition to like Sunday ticket and, of course, gambling, that fantasy football is one of the huge contributing factors to the NFL's rise over the past, you know, 10 to 15 years?
For sure.
I mean, you're not plugging in as a casual football fan to watch a Jaguars-Bills Week 5 matchup unless you've got, Josh Allen or Leonard Fournette, right?
Right.
So now, you love watching football because you have a rooting interest in these guys from other teams. Now, double that. Because not only do you have the guys on the field when your team is on offense, but no matter what game you turn on, who's on the field, you probably have someone playing for one of your fantasy teams.
In fact, Jags Bills is a pretty sick IDP matchup.
That's a really nice matchup.
You got Tremaine Edmonds, Josh Allen,
Jordan Poyer.
Yeah, man, that's fun. That makes me excited. Actually, I'm ready to see that game.
Like that's the kind of you think the sickness is bad now, it just goes to 11 because suddenly teams that are just like wastelands for fantasy relevance, you're probably not excited about a lot of Jags players, maybe outside of Fournette and DJ Chark, but you get on the defensive side and all of a sudden you have,
the defensive Josh Allen.
Yeah, defensive Josh Allen, Calais Campbell, Miles Jack,
Quincy Williams.
Quincy Williams was a breakout.
Sorry, Adam.
Yeah, that's a Murray State guy from Kentucky, right?
Yeah, he's from Kentucky.
Yeah,
We're
so
legally obligated to
we
say
have
his
to
name.
mention
Extreme dark horse,
he was one of our dark horse breakouts.
the darkest horse.
Yes. So, but the point is that you're going to love everything about football even more because now you've unlocked the other side of the ball. Whereas previously you viewed defense through this negative frame of, well, crap, that linebacker just stuffed my running back at the goal line or darted into the backfield and sacked my quarterback who was about to throw a touchdown to a wide open wide receiver. But now there's a positive frame that you're viewing football through, which is, oh my gosh, that linebacker just darted in and got a sack. That's going to be 4 points for my team. And, then the next play, the running back runs it in. Well, then that whole drive for you has just so much more meaning now than it did previously. So it just flips your whole mindset about viewing the defense from this negative light into a positive light and getting excited when big defensive plays happen.
That's so good, Josh.
You like that,
I'm
Bobo?
so ready to play IDP.
Have you never played? Is this your first
This is
time?
my first time.
You talk really good about it for not having played before. So that's our reasoning, Kyle. And what we want to do now is give you the setup, right? So that you understand, okay, I know a little bit more now about why, what are some of the selling points, but begin to conceptualize, what this should actually look like if you were to implement IDP into a league or set up a new league with an IDP component to it. So, Adam, I think you are the person to turn to. So what would you suggest to Kyle as far as if he's looking to set up an IDP league, what should he be doing?
Okay, well, you want to at least have 9 IDP guys that you're starting. And I suggest, you make it deep. Do 9 on 9 at least. 9 offense, 9 defense.
We do recommend always match your offense with your defense.
Yeah. And then your Sleeper, I know you're very familiar with that platform. That's a great platform for it because it just has the 3 positions. It's great for beginners. So you have defensive line, so that incorporates your defensive ends and your defensive tackles. You have linebackers, and then you have DBs, so it combines your cornerbacks and your safeties together. And some guys on Sleeper have dual designations, so you can start TJ Watt as a defensive lineman, which is cool. You can make some monster lineups, by having that capability. So yeah, I would suggest, start at least 9. We prefer 11. 11 is what we like. 11 on 11. And then tackle numbers, you're going to want to do probably, 1.5 points for solo tackles, maybe half a point, 0.75 for assist. Sacks, this is where it's kind of important. Sacks should be worth a lot. They should be probably worth at least 4 or 5 points. Just because it's, I wish I had this Scott Barrett stat pulled up, but they are just such a difference maker when they're drive killers pretty much when someone records a sack.
And also tackle for loss. That's
Right.
another thing too. We are proponents of what's called a big play league.
Yeah.
So anything like an interception or a tackle for loss or a fumble or a sack, gets a lot of points because that's a big play. That's a big turning point in the game.
Yeah, and so by the end of the year, you could like compare like a Darius Leonard to like a McCaffrey. So Leonard probably not this year, but last year he probably had like 350 points almost, whereas your top running back has 400 points.
Yeah. And the goal with the scoring, and there are great resources out there for how you can set up your scoring depending on your league platform. But Sleeper, we know the ballers are big fans of Sleeper. That really is the best platform right now for IDP, especially for beginners. Now, if you want to get into a sicko league where you have contracts and all that, we can talk to you about Reality Sports Online. But
You should do it too. I mean, with your background of like newspaper stats and like getting into like baseball statistics, you would love RSO.
It's fun.
It's amazing.
We're big proponents of that as well. That's actually what our main league is on, but that introduces like contracts,
Right.
extensions, IR.
Yeah, let's do 30 on trying to convince him to join RSO.
Yeah,
Let's do 30 more minutes. You got 30, Kyle?
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll do another 30 on RSO, and we really could. We could sit there and talk about it all day. But yeah, a sleeper league, and then 9-on-9. You can find good scoring out there. It's such an easy platform to get started with. So that, as far as like conceptually, is what you're going to be looking at. So,
And actually, I asked some guys today in my league because I joined a couple startups this year, and some of it was some of the guys in the league, it was their first time. So I said, I asked who all played IDP for the first time this year. What'd you think? Glad you did. First comment was loved it, way more in depth. Second guy said likewise, so much fun. One guy gave us a little more. He said it was my first IDP as well. I'd say I like the format a lot. It adds positions of value when scoring. Starting positions are aligned well with offense. He said it created so many more trade opportunities, and he said it's his second favorite format behind IDP with contracts. So.
And I think one of those comments was, "Who are you and what are you doing in our league?" So
Right.
it may have just been like an interloper in there, just coming in to ask some questions and darting out. So that's our argument, Kyle. So we're going to open up the floor for questions and comments. Now that you've heard us lay out the why and the how, what are you thinking?
Now, so you guys used a 4 or 5 pronged approach in terms of your argument, and I will say it definitely like was good in terms of like, okay, I can hear what they're saying. And I would just say some of those were great Jedi mind tricks where I go, that is a good point. Especially, I think one of the main things that seems clear, and I've thought about this before, is every play is important. So, the dump off pass that goes for -3 yards is, just in half-point leagues, it's like, all right, you got 0.2 points. It's kind of, but you're saying if you get a tackle for loss there, that's a big deal.
That's huge.
Like 4 or 5 points right there.
It's a big time play for your defense. It adds more scoring, which we've always been in favor of. More points is more fun. More players on the field, more guys to root for. Yeah, it just makes every game way more interesting.
It's also fun too to watch the defensive side of the ball, not always just watch, what McCaffrey's going to do. Maybe to watch Deion Jones, every play just to see, okay, is he trying to blitz here? Is he dropping back into pass coverage? Man, it's a sickness for sure, but it makes football so much more.
And it does help with matchups, individual matchups. If McCaffrey's going against a terrible linebacker like Quincy Williams was earlier in the year, like you're like, okay, he's gonna really
he's gonna
eat
ball
this.
out. Yeah, he's gonna eat this guy alive.
Same thing with like corners. You understand cornerback matchups a whole lot better. So I mean, it does help in that aspect of it.
Yeah, like I know you may have seen some of the videos that Honey Badger was posting of him, like, covering the first 2 reads for Deshaun Watson in that Texans game and then chasing Watson out of bounds. Like, that's the kind of stuff that you appreciate so much more because you watch the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, for me, so I did a little bit of work with Pro Football Focus where I did some film stuff for them a while back. And, knowing where people are positioned is a big deal. But, we use PFF a lot just in terms of like routes run. And so seeing that on the defensive side, looking at, are there any statistics beyond just like, counting stats that you guys look at that are predictive? For instance, like Deion Jones, do you guys know, hey, this guy dropped into coverage X number of times, or he blitzed this number of times, and those are like helpful indicators for y'all?
So we're actually doing consistency charts, taking a page out of the Ballers playbook, and we're going to be doing a series after we get done with this episode in the next few weeks, talking about like sort of like the truth. You guys are in the middle of the truth series right now. So what were the truth of some of these linebackers and defensive ends and defensive backs? And as I'm putting together these charts, and there's some other guys in the industry that have talked about this before, the most dependable statistic that you want to look at, it's similar to offense, but even more so on defense, I feel like, is snap counts. What snap percentage are guys playing? Because I know I put it together for, I believe, the defensive linemen, and the guys who were top 12 played around, I think, like 77% of snaps on average. The guys who were defensive linemen 2 in that like 13 to 24 range were like 73%. Defensive lineman 3 was like 70%. So it is just that's one of the big statistics that I think it's easy to sometimes maybe get caught up in a lot of these more advanced statistics, which are awesome. But at the end of the day, it's what guys are out there the most and that have the opportunities for tackles and sacks and big plays.
I would love to see more of those advanced statistics.
Absolutely,
yes. It's so small now that there's not enough smart people in it. But that's the hope, that it can grow, and there'll be a lot of smart people that like the Sigmund Blooms and the Scott Barrett's, PFF guys, all those dudes that start getting more involved with this. And then we'll have a lot of advanced stats for IDP. It'll be cool.
Yeah, you have to pay attention definitely to like defensive coordinators. What kind of scheme do they run?
3-4, 4-3, all that stuff, super important.
How do they use safeties?
Are they taking linebackers off on third down?
Yeah. Are they bringing in like Honey Badger's a great example. John Johnson, Jamal Adams. The reason these guys are so good for IDP, they're playing up close to the line of scrimmage. They're almost like another linebacker on the field. So where guys line up, also very important, because it's hard to get a sack if you're, dropping back in coverage. You have to be up close to that line of scrimmage. So for those defensive backs, those cheat code players that can rack up sacks, you need to pay attention to where those guys are lining up.
So you guys mentioned some of the scoring, just like, a sack's worth maybe 4 or 5 points or whatever it is. Can a defensive player score negative points? Like in the same way, if there's a fumbles or interceptions, is there any type of negative outcome?
No, I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
Okay. That would be one thought of just like, it's not just Andy Dalton has a dud game. It's like he's hurting you compared to his other person. So I wonder if that has any discrepancy in just terms of, that obviously doesn't happen a ton, but it's a killer when your running back Chris Carson fumbles twice and is benched. Where like you get the defensive player who's young, who gets taken off the field because he got beat. But likely those guys are just going to keep playing unless they're blowing them out, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And here's the thing, too. It does even out a little bit. And right now, that's just a limitation of this. The scoring options aren't there for us to be able to give these defensive guys negative points. Like, unfortunately, we don't have like a blown assignment, scoring metric on the back end of our, RSO league or whatever. But I will say, offensive scoring, typically, at least from what we've seen in our leagues, is more reliable week to week. You're going to get some kind of output from a higher percentage of your offensive players than defense. You are probably on a week-to-week basis going to have, if you're like we're starting 11 guys, most weeks, probably 2 or 3 of those guys are going to get you fewer than 5 points. It just because a defensive guy can have a great game, but maybe he was flawless in coverage or hurried the quarterback or knocked him down but didn't record a stat. Exactly.
Or was it Jalen Ramsey and didn't get thrown at a lot?
Yeah, Darrelle Revis, great player, Hall of Famer, would have been an awful IDP player because he never got thrown at.
Yeah, is that hard to be able to gauge when you go, this guy is a Pro Bowler, but it changed? I guess there's a level of that too to offensive side where, no one would question whether Aaron Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but for fantasy this year, there's only like 5 games where you actually could use him. Yeah, so is that kind of similar thought process of like, there's these names that are big, but then at the end of the day, it's like counting stats wise, they're not that helpful?
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
Like Von Miller.
Von Miller is a great example. And also, too, there's, especially with cornerbacks, you have to walk a fine line between this guy has to be bad enough to get thrown at a lot because he's got to be able to rack up tackles and passes defensed and interceptions. But he can't be so bad that he's going to get benched and lose his opportunity. So you do walk that kind of fine line.
Cornerback's a really weird position. Like a lot of times we just tell people just to try and stream
Try to
cornerbacks.
stream. Yep.
There's so many of them. You can find usually some ones that are pretty consistent
So
week to week.
I'm used to doing matchups when it comes to wide receivers versus cornerbacks. I wrote a DFS article, and so a lot of the times I'll look at PFF, and it helped me get to know these quarterbacks and which teams to pick on. You're like, okay, the Cardinals were atrocious, and here's who I'm just going to pick on. I think it was Byron Murphy was their rookie, and just like I think he gave up 9 touchdowns. Like
great for IDP. Racked up a lot of tackles.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm trying to figure out is like, or like Logan Ryan. So Logan Ryan gave up the most receiving yards in the league. So for our offensive side, we pick on him all the time, especially him playing the slot. It was just like easy to just. But you're saying that Logan Ryan was actually somewhat valuable?
Yeah, the number 1 defensive back, valuable.
The number I think 4 overall IDP in our sleeper league.
Yeah, he had an insane year.
Logan Ryan,
led the team in tackles.
Yeah, was like top 5.
Is that just like from him? I guess staying healthy, being on the field a ton of snaps.
Yeah,
and he would make plays every once in a while, but
right.
But like in terms of just getting picked on, just abused, but he was out there.
Yes.
That's all that matters.
You see that more so from the DBs than you do. The talent really shines through from the defensive tackles, defensive ends, and really even the linebackers.
Yeah, and there is something to be said too. Like Blake Martinez is a great example. Blake is a staple of IDP over the past few years. Not a great linebacker for the NFL.
For sure. Yeah.
Gets picked on a ton in coverage, but is on the field. I think he played like 100% of snaps this year or close to it, and racked up insane tackle numbers, and I think was probably like a top 6 or 7 guy for IDP at linebacker. So there is a little bit of similarity. Darius Leonard got picked on a lot as a rookie in coverage. Part of the reason he was the LB1 last year for IDP. So there is a little bit of that same thing, but especially with cornerbacks, it is the quarterback equivalent for the IDP side of week to week. There are a few outliers like your Logan Ryans, but for the most part, you just want to stream that position.
So you would say then like Richard Sherman was, way better than I thought he would be this year in terms of not getting, but he wasn't picked on the same way that he like. So was he? I'm assuming didn't come out that well.
He wasn't. He actually wasn't that bad this year. But in previous years, he was unplayable because he wasn't getting targeted a lot. But he actually had some. He was pretty inconsistent. He was up and down. But he had some weeks where he had some strong weeks, 20, 25 point weeks.
Yeah, and that's all it takes. Sometimes is if a cornerback that you're not expecting maybe, but like 5 to 10 points from takes a pick six back to the house, he may have just won you your week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But
yeah,
on the other,
I think that's definitely a little bit of like, if I have some apprehension right now, it's changing my brain because I only look at who can I exploit, from the offensive standpoint in DFS. And now it's saying those guys are actually could be super valuable. Not all of them, I'm assuming, but a lot of them could be.
Well, the good news is you're already thinking that way, though. Your brain is already wired to think about who's getting exploited by the offense. That's a great place to start. If you combine the top tier guys with some of these guys that are being exploited, but they're on the field a ton, that honest to God probably fills in most of your IDP roster across the board.
Gotcha.
So you got
you were mentioning the defensive tackles and the ends is pretty close to who we think is, hey, these are elite players for the most part.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just basically your sack artist. That's going to be the guys that are the top of the IDP world.
Yeah, your Danielle Hunters, your Myles Garrett before he lost his mind.
Nick Bosa is going to be a mainstay now. Josh Allen, Chase Young is going to be the next guy that's going to be the
Was
big
Barrett
deal.
like out of nowhere this year?
Yes.
Sure.
Oh, absolutely. We kept saying on the pod, like, okay, is this ever going to like cool off?
Yeah.
And I mean, he just rubbed IDP players' faces in it just all year. The dude was awesome.
It was a really weird year for IDP because a lot of these edge rushers, these guys that are linebackers, they had huge years like Whitney Merciless, Shaq Barrett, TJ Watt was awesome the whole year. But yeah, you gotta, those edge players, they can be frustrating.
Yeah, because they're not getting as many tackles. But it was just a
They can
weird
win you
year.
weeks if
Yeah,
they have 3-4 sacks.
it was a weird year where they had just a lot of boom games where they were getting to the quarterback 2, 3, 4 times with sacks, and that's 45 points. You've won your week.
The Shaq Barrett, no one saw that coming.
No,
because he was
nobody.
undrafted. Then he was in Denver for 2 or 3 years behind Von Miller, and then
And there are also too, it's again similar to the offensive side. There are big name players that aren't that good for IDP. Like Adam mentioned Von Miller earlier. Jadeveon Clowney is probably about to become the highest paid defensive player in NFL history. Not that good for IDP.
Yeah.
Khalil Mack wasn't great this year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Khalil Mack, big name, not that great.
Yeah, and we do this statistic every year, but for like defensive special teams, like last year the Bears were unbelievable, but there's never been a team that's repeated, a number one team that's repeated. In fact, a lot of the number one teams usually drop like 10 spots.
Yeah.
And so, there's teams like that I could see how Khalil Mack, you'd want on your team, but in terms of like sheer counting stats, it was not even close to what he
Yeah,
did
he's
here.
he's like one of the guys that you want on your team, but you want him as like your third or fourth linebacker.
Yeah.
You want your one if you start 4 linebackers, you want consistency, guys that are going to get 10 tackles a week, and then you want your fourth one to be that big play guy that can swing you weeks.
And that's the beauty of having we mentioned having 9 positions or 11, for your IDP lineup. You want to have at least one flex in there because what we always talk about is, and it's the ballers talk about it as too, and it's so smart. It's like, are you in a matchup that you feel safe, you feel like you need to win, you just don't need any guys to crap your team? Okay, put a linebacker in there that's going to be solid, get some tackles, score 10 points, maybe he goes for 20. But if you're the underdog and you need to swing for the fences, put one of those edge rushers in your flex and see if he can get you 2 or 3 sacks and win you a game.
Gotcha. So my next question was just about drafting. So
great question.
Oh yeah.
So when do you start taking them in drafts and stuff?
yeah, so you're doing your redraft. I'm assuming your running backs are still the most valuable part.
Definitely.
Yes.
Offense is still king
Offense
here.
doesn't change.
Yeah.
It's more a matter of like, when do you start mixing the two?
Okay.
And from what we saw, we our main league is an auction draft. It's a contract league, so it's a little bit different. Obviously, the order of when guys go is not as important in an auction draft. But we did do a snake draft for our IDP league on Sleeper this year.
And I did a dynasty. I did a start 11 IDP dynasty league too.
So when did guys start going off the board in that league?
Usually around like round 6 or 7. So like player, probably 70 overall.
Okay.
But they can go, you can take a Daniil Hunter in the 5th round. That would be fine. I think that's probably like the earliest they should be taken is around the 5th, 6th round.
And the way you can kind of look at this is like we look at trade questions a lot on the show, and it's like, well, what is a Myles Garrett worth? Like we had this discussion on one of our previous episodes of like in an offense and IDP league
Pre-helmet incident.
Yeah, pre-helmet. Like this, when he was pretty much the number 1 IDP player in all of fantasy. And he was getting offers for like back end wide receiver 1s, back end RB 1s, high end RB 2s.
Like a first round, a first round pick, a 2nd round pick. That would be about what you could expect if you're going to trade Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
So the offensive guys are still the most valuable because they have a higher ceiling week to week, and their floor is a lot higher than the defensive guys.
But Adam said the perfect thing, though, and I think that even still this rings true like in offensive only, but especially for IDP, you're just looking for consistency. You're looking for those, like, you're trying to stay away from those 2-point weeks, and you always can't, anticipate those 45-week, 4-sack Aaron Donald weeks. You're looking for those 10 to 20-point guys that can consistently, put that up week after week. It's hard to find, but, we've gotten pretty decent at it over the last couple of years. I feel like, we're in a league right now. Our most competitive league is the one that we did the podcast for before this. It's a 12-team league, and it's ridiculously competitive now. We've probably, because of the podcast, given these guys way too much.
They know way too much about what we're
street cred
thinking.
now.
I'm sure the ballers feel the exact same way of now everyone knows what we're going to do and how we're going to try to draft. So and Bobby did a fun experiment in that listener league where he was like, it was not fun for him, but he took all defensive guys and was just like, let me just fill in my offense.
Like way too early. I think
you took Tyreek and Juju with your first 2 picks, and then he went defense.
Then I went Aaron Donald.
Don't do that.
So he was the trend.
Green 0 RB.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
More like just zero offense.
0 RB, 0 wide receiver, 0 tight end.
Yeah.
I think he went like 3-10 that year or this past season.
Yeah.
So that still proves that even in an IDP league, offense still reigns supreme. The good IDP players are the ones who can find ways to match that defensive talent in the right spots with the offensive guys that they're taking.
And Adam's right too. You can reach a little bit for a D tackle or a D end. Those linebackers, you're going to find a bunch of people who make tackles.
Yeah, like good, D ends are like tight ends. It's rare to find elite ones. There's probably like 5 to 6 really elite defensive ends.
Yeah, you want to go grab one of those guys early if you can, because trying to stream those guys is a nightmare.
I feel like he's on the fence. I mean, look at him. He's like, man,
he's thinking about it.
Jump in.
He's thinking about it. Well, let me do this. Do you have any more questions? Any more ponderings about IDP?
No, you guys did good. Answer my questions.
Nice. All right. Well, we don't want to put you on the spot about your league that you're in with your buddies. Maybe we'll send you the link to this episode and let them listen to it and see if that maybe kicks up some discussion. But we do want to extend an invite. We are going to put you on the spot in one particular way. We are going to have a listener league for our podcast again this season, and we would love for you to be a part of it. Would you like to join us for your inaugural season of IDP in our listener league?
$1,000 buy-in.
Not $1,000. It is a free buy-in.
I was just sitting here thinking, how could I fit this in? So I like you guys, so I'm going to say yes.
All right. We got him, guys. Awesome. Nicely done.
Oh, for a second, I was like, is he going to tell us no? Is he going to tell us no?
Heck no. No, I got to ask my wife, of course, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, yes, we will be sending out details about that. We did it this past year. It was a ton of fun. Adam's dad actually knocked him out of our sleeper league. So, family Christmas was a little icy.
Not good.
But we'll get you in that league. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think we did what? Did we do like 9-9 for that one or something like that?
Yeah.
So it's a great league to start in. Sleeper's such an easy platform.
Don't really have to worry about cornerbacks. It'll be nice. It'll be we'll have a good time with it.
Good way to ease in.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, Kyle, man, we really just truly appreciate you coming on, letting us talk your ear off here for going on about 70 minutes. That's another Big 3 IDP staple. We say let's keep it to a tight 30 or 45, and then we end up going long. But it's just because we love IDP and we love fantasy.
We're chatty Cathys.
Yeah.
We're excited.
We do. We get on here and we just get going. So
let's finish the Big 3-way and ask him his favorite T-Bell order.
Oh yeah. Okay. So Kyle, you may not be a degenerate like us when it comes to your dietary habits, but do you eat at Taco Bell?
This is funny that you asked me of all places this. So when I was a freshman in college, I got Taco Bell with my roommates, and I got Taco Bell all throughout my life. And I just remember feeling so sick to my stomach, the run, that I made a pact with my roommate in 2005, and I have not gone back to Taco Bell.
Cut it out. Cut it off.
Yeah,
cut it off.
That's good. We're done with Kyle.
Right, thanks,
okay.
Kyle.
So no, what is? Do you have if you're not eating T-Bell, that's fine. We understand it does give you the runs. So yeah, it's not good for your heart. So is there a fast food place of choice for the Borgognoni?
We're in Atlanta, so we get a lot of Chick-fil-A. A ton of Chick-fil-A. So, and I get free Chick-fil-A almost every week somehow from somebody. So,
wow. Nice.
So I will say, I've had a lot of Chick-fil-A in my life.
That's my number one, man.
Yeah, ours too. We're big fans.
We got 2 here. We got 2 Chick-fil-A's here, so we rep it pretty hard.
Yeah, we're Chicken City up here in Bowling Green.
We still want you to be a better person than you were the day before, though. So when you're around a Popeyes, stop and get you a chicken sandwich.
Have you gotten the Popeyes chicken sandwich yet?
I haven't, and I have a couple of opportunities close to me, but I just haven't pulled the trigger.
It will change
Do it.
your life.
So
It's amazing.
You're going to be a new Kyle. You're going to start playing IDP, and you're going to get the Popeyes chicken sandwich, and you're just going to fly, baby.
I love new Kyle.
That's what I'm going to tell my wife. I said, I don't know what happened. I started, talking on the podcast. I'm going to defensive league. And now I have the runs because I'm eating Taco Bell.
Well, you don't have to jump back in on the Taco Bell. We won't push you that far. We know it's not good for the intestines, but definitely check out the Popeyes sandwich.
You could get you a Baja Blast, maybe.
Yeah, a Baja Blast would be good.
Okay.
So, Kyle, give us your Twitter handle. Where can people follow you? What do you have going on for the people who want to keep up with you throughout the season? Where can they check out your stuff?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm at Kyle_Borg. And usually I'm dropping some statistic. Today, it was the fact that Derek Carr led the league in third down passing yards, touchdown, passer rating. And I looked it up. It wasn't because they got more third down opportunities either. Like he was not. They were 19th in third downs. So I love throwing a good statistic. And if you check out Fantasy Footballers, put out a couple articles already, including a boom boom kicker statistic article coming out in the next month.
Love it. All right, Kyle. We'll be keeping an eye out for that, and we're going to have you back on the pod. Maybe after we have the draft for the Listener League on Sleeper, maybe we'll have you back on to talk about, hey, how was the first IDP draft?
Sounds good.
All right, man. Thanks a lot for coming on, Kyle.
Thanks,
Take care,
Kyle.
buddy.